Hello, and welcome to this edition of Rise Up with Rebecca Seawright on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Assemblymember Rebecca Seawright, serving the Upper East Side, Yorkville, and Roosevelt Island, here tonight from our East 79th Street community office. Over the past week or so, over 20 New York rabbis flew to Poland on a mission to deliver medical supplies to Ukrainian refugees that have sought a safe haven from the bombardment of the cities and villages by the Russian army. We have with us a very special guest, Rabbi Joel Mosbacher, who was on that mission, who's going to speak to us this evening. Thank you, Rabbi, for joining us. And we'd like to lead off with you telling us about the mission, the purpose of it, how large was the delegation, and then we have some questions that we'll be asking you about the mission. Thank you so much for joining us.
Assembly member, thank you so much for having me. Honored to be a part of your district, and thank you for your service. The group was assembled by UJA Federation of New York City that has allocated already about $5 million for relief efforts in and around Ukraine. They brought together in very short order 18 rabbis from the tri-state area. 18 is a good lucky Jewish number. It means life. 18 of us traveled together. And I would say in short, the mission of the mission was to bring supplies. We brought thousands of pounds of supplies that I can say more about to bear witness to the crisis unfolding, to bring spiritual strength to those who are seeking to help. And hopefully we were able to do that each in a measure over the course of about 48 hours on the ground.
Well, thank you. This was truly a mission of mercy. And how did it come all about? So you said UJA was the sponsor of this with 18 rabbis. And so was there a lot of planning, or was given the war and what's going on, was this something that came together fairly quickly in response to what's going on?
So it all came together quite quickly. I'm sure that I know that UJA has been planning it for, a few extra days, but we received an email, I believe it was about 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. And they said, if you are interested in going, send us your passport number by 4 p.m. And we left on Saturday evening. So for us, certainly, and for UJA, it came together rather quickly. They have partners on the ground, fundees, grantees that they've been working with, who have been able to give them kind of live updates and status reports in terms of the scene on the ground. And they were working closely all the way through the trip to make sure that we were going places that were, first of all, safe, and second of all, places that where we could perhaps do the most good and bring the most important stories back to our communities.
Wonderful. And what was it like? Did you talk with the refugees, and what did they report to you about the invasion and its horrific impact?
So it was both spiritually heavy, certainly hearing from refugees about their stories. And at the same time, a kind of buoying as we saw the incredible volunteers that are doing work on the ground. So let me speak first to the refugee situation. We did speak with refugees who had, in some cases, spent 6 days journeying to get from wherever they were in Ukraine to the border. Some then waited 48 hours to be able to cross the border in terribly cold conditions. Apparently, at the border crossing where we were at, just on one night, 6 people had died of hypothermia waiting to cross the border. So they had made their way from a terrible situation, got to the border, and then were unable to make it to the border. We were on the Poland side. We were not in Ukraine, but we met with some refugees who had made their way. And it's heartbreaking. It is, as I think been reported, almost exclusively a refugee situation of women and children, mothers and children, some elderly as well. Men ages 18 to 60 cannot leave because they need to defend the Ukraine. So as someone pointed out, we saw lots of strollers, almost no luggage, and very few men. The people who came across had very little that they could bring with them. And so it was really quite heartbreaking in that way. Some of them have places to go, right? Some of them have friends or relatives in other places, and some people, their only direction was out. And then they come to Poland and other places seeking safe haven, whether that's in Poland or other places as well. I would say that the stories are different, right? Some of them, want to stay in Western Ukraine or Eastern Poland in hopes that they'll be able to go home soon, right? They don't want to leave. I can't imagine what it'd be like if any of us had to leave our homes. We would be planning to come back. Other people are starting a new life in places like Poland, and others are seeking a new life elsewhere. So the stories are different, but the tragedy is certainly the same.
Mm-hmm. Wow, just amazing. Can you describe the living conditions of the refugees, especially for children, the disabled people, and people with pressing medical needs?
I would say, I can't really speak to the situation in Ukraine. I am sure, of course, that it is much worse than what we were witness to in Poland. One of the things on the other side, as I mentioned earlier, one of the heartening things was the extraordinary outreach of hospitality shown by the Polish people. In the last 2 weeks, Poland's population has increased by 10%. 10%. It's a country of 38 million people, and almost 2 million people have come across. So whether it is just on the Poland side of the border, where people have brought food and coffee and tea for people who may have been traveling for 6 days and more, or the ways in which people have opened their homes. We have a congregant whose parents live in Gdańsk in Poland, and they have 8 refugees staying with them now. All the organizations that we encountered, almost none of the organizations and people that we encountered, the Polish people, were in the refugee business 2 weeks ago. We met a couple who run, what they do for a living is they run an Airbnb. And this situation happened, and they were like, we know something about hospitality. And so now they're working with all their friends to make sure that people have a place to stay. We met another guy who he and his business is to be in the music festival industry. And he figured, well, I know something about having lots of people who need to be fed and cared for and housed. So people are just showing extraordinary hospitality. And it's really inspiring. So I would say that the people who've been able to make it over the border, obviously every story is different, but are finding hospitality, are finding places to stay. And the question then becomes, what happens? What's their medium and long-term prognosis? I believe that while we were there, the Polish government passed a law making it possible for Ukrainian refugees to stay and work in Ukraine for at least 18 months. So again, people who are able to make it out, I think on average are finding warmth, hospitality, places to stay, and any assistance that can be given in terms of for folks who want to move on to another place. European countries have opened their doors in that way, which is certainly inspiring.
That is very inspiring and so wonderful to hear. And as you mentioned, most of the men have remained in the Ukraine. Is that true based upon your experience in Poland? Are many of the women returning? And you mentioned strollers. Or are some of the refugees, the babies, are they using the strollers as their place to sleep? Are there cribs, enough cribs and beds in terms of encouraging people to send money, to send relief supplies that are much needed?
Our experience at the border itself, our experience at 2 different transit centers, our experience at a train station just off the border gives truth to that sense that it's all women and children and elderly people. We did not see any young men. I mean, any men between 18 and 60 who had crossed the border. And again, as these women, largely as the women that we encountered and we were able to talk to told their stories, the idea that they were leaving their husbands and partners behind, not knowing whether and when they would see them again, was just heartbreaking. In terms of relief efforts, at least on the Poland side, again, as I said, we brought thousands of pounds of material that some which our congregations had collected, others from the AFIA Foundation, about which I can say more, that is getting much needed medical supplies into Ukraine itself. Our experience in talking to people who are providing the relief and the help on the Poland side is they're scrambling, right? They need financial resources to be able to purchase supplies, and then occasionally, when they get the financial resources that they need, then they go to stores in places like Lublin and Warsaw in Poland, and the shelves are bare, so they also need supplies. Again, in terms of the specifics of the questions you asked around cribs and such, I can't really speak to that because I don't know enough to be able to say. But I do know that every effort is being made, from what we could bear witness to. Every effort is being made to make sure that people have, the most essential places to stay and food to eat and clothes to wear, as they figure out what's next.
And did you say you went to a transfer station or train station? What you mentioned?
Yeah, so we made 3 stops along the border. One was actually at the border itself, where again there were NGOs and volunteers there to provide just immediate relief for people who were crossing. Then people were taken from there to a transit center in the next town over, which essentially was a mall that had been completely turned in to a relief center. So the jewelry store had been turned into a medical center, and the toy store had been turned into a place where legal aid was being given and passport assistance. And every store that you would think of, and the food court had been taken over by World Central Kitchen to supply food for everybody who needed it, and cots everywhere where there wasn't something else happening, clothing being given out, medical care being given, food being served. Women and children were sleeping on cots in the stores, in the hallways. So for my congregants, I know that picture of going into a mall and seeing everything you would not expect to see in a mall in terms of help being given. And then from there, people are being taken to the train station, where again, some people have specific places that they are going, people to stay with, and other people are just sort of getting on the first train that comes. There was a group of volunteers that had a big map of Europe laid out on a table in the train station. And I don't speak Polish or Ukrainian or Russian, but I think what you could tell was happening there was that the women on the other side were just saying, okay, if I got on this train, where would it go? Where would I end up? And just the thought of all that and leaving everything behind is just heartbreaking.
Right. And I'm sure there's only such a limited amount that people can take with them. What do you think, or what did you see as the greatest physical needs of the refugees?
I would say they really need essential resources right there, as you said. And as we noticed, they never came. When we were at the border, we never saw someone with much more than a, kind of a carry-on bag. I would say that was sort of the most that we saw. So if you can imagine, especially if you're a mother with young kids, they need diapers, they need baby food, they need, kind of essential medical supplies. Our congregation collected, and other congregations too, hundreds and hundreds of bottles of Tylenol and ibuprofen and shampoo and toothpaste and all the kind of essential items that we kind of take for granted as we go through our day just to make it through the day, are some of the things that they clearly need right there. And then within Ukraine, again, we were delivering other packages from this organization, this amazing organization called AFIA. And those packages were filled with tourniquets and suture kits and burn kits and all kinds of medical supplies to treat people who were living in a war zone. So again, it depends to a degree. It depends on which side of the border you're on. All of that is needed. I've had people say to me this week, "Oh, I think we should send more money more than supplies." Or some other people said, "We should send supplies more than money." And the answer is both are needed. And if you just think about what you need, what your family needs to get up in the morning and live until the evening, those are the kinds of things that the people that we saw there need, because they couldn't really take anything much with them.
Right.
And many of them had been on a long journey, and many of them had a long journey still to come. In addition, then the next level is a place to live for the longer term, a way to earn some money for the longer term. So there's like the immediate need, and then the interim need, and then the long-term vision for all of them, of course, is to try and be able to go home to their home.
Right, right. So what other organizations are helping? I know you said that you went on this trip with UJA. What other organizations are you involved with?
So obviously, needless to say, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations that are doing sacred work. We saw the Red Cross there, World Central Kitchen there. The organizations that I've been encouraging my congregation to support include UJA's emergency appeal, the emergency of the appeal of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. One thing to know for listeners who may not know is that Ukraine has, I think, the 5th largest Jewish population in Europe. And so the Jewish community there, along with everyone else, is suffering. So I've been encouraging people to make contributions to organizations like the World Union for Progressive Judaism that supports the reform and progressive communities that exist there. And then the other is AFIA, which our congregation and other congregations have been working with for many years. They're not a new organization. They respond wherever in the world, including in the United States, that there is a crisis, whether it's a climate change related crisis or whatever else it might be. They are there. They're based in Yonkers. They have a big warehouse in Yonkers. We actually may be taking some volunteers up there to go do some packing of supplies and such. So those are 3 of many that I've been encouraging my members to get involved in. Certainly through UJA's support, organizations like the Joint Distribution Committee and others that are on the ground in Poland and in other countries around, are also doing really incredible work. And there are many others that I know that people can support. In addition to things like gathering supplies and collecting them and finding an organization, whether it's AFIA or someone else, that's able to get them over to either Poland or Ukraine directly.
Right. And what's happening in Ukraine to religious facilities like synagogues and churches and monuments and statues? Do you have any feedback?
I don't know that I have information. I just don't. I don't really know. We did not hear, which doesn't mean it's not happening, that religious communities are being particularly targeted, or that religious buildings are being particularly targeted. Unfortunately, what we see is that Russia is targeting apparently wherever they think people, just ordinary citizens, live. Mm-hmm. So to your question, I can't speak to whether synagogues or other religious institutions have been particularly more affected than others. What we know is just that it's a civilian crisis of epic proportions at all levels. We'll be certainly paying attention to the religious institutions, not only Jewish ones, because we don't only care about Jewish people. Actually, we met with an Israeli medical team that was right there at the border, and someone asked them, and I think this is important for people to hear, someone asked them, "Do you only help Jewish people?" And the doctor, in what was sort of kind of the line of the trip for me, said, "You know what, here in Poland 80 years ago, people selected against Jews. We do not do selection here. We treat everybody. We take care of everybody that comes our way." So I hope that there won't be particular religious persecution of anybody either in Ukraine or in Poland, but I don't know whether if that's happening at this moment. I can't speak to that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And how would you describe the spirit and morale of the people that you did meet with?
So I would say, again, it's sort of, for the refugees, it ranges from kind of shell shock to disbelief, to tears, to silence. I'm sure it goes in waves. For the Polish people that we met, there is a kind of hyper focus at this moment on doing whatever people can do. And unfortunately, we know in New York City what it looks like when there's a crisis, right? Whether it's Hurricane Sandy or after 9/11, there was a remarkable period of time in which people come together and do the small things, whether that's holding doors for people or doing whatever it needs to be done to take care of people. And I think that's the phase in which the Polish people are in right now. And I'm sure other people in other countries around Ukraine right now is in this moment of just outpouring of dropping everything. Businesses everywhere saying, if you want to go and volunteer, of course you can do that. There's just an overwhelming sense of openness and open-heartedness and hospitality. Unfortunately, and this is something that we started to hear from some of the volunteers, is that they recognize now in ways that none of us really want to have to admit that this is unfortunately looking like it's going to be a marathon and not a sprint. And so the question is, how does that relief effort continue to be bolstered? They can't rely endlessly on people who are taking a break from their jobs. Those people are going to need to go back to work. So then they're going to need to hire people. We met organizations that already have refugees that are volunteering with those organizations to help other refugees. So the spirit of the Polish people that we witnessed was inspiring and amazing. And in a lot of ways, I pray for the strength that they will need as well to face the weeks and months that come. I mean, even if the war ended tomorrow, there's over 3 million refugees have already left, and that situation won't turn around overnight. So when you compound that with the horrors of war and the likelihood that this is going to be going on for a while, our attention needs to continue to be on this situation. One of the things I'm aware of, and one of the things I'll say to my congregation tonight, is I'm guessing that the buildings in New York City that are all lit up with blue and yellow, which is wonderful, that won't remain. Something else is going to draw our attention. Something else will happen, God forbid, near where we live or somewhere further away. And the challenge that we will all face, those of us who are moved in this moment, is to pay attention, to not close our eyes, and to stay aware of the situation, to continue to do what we can.
Right, absolutely, well said. And do you have future plans to go back to Poland? And is your temple collecting supplies for our viewers out there on the Upper East Side and in the 76th Assembly District?
So at this moment, I don't have plans to return. I think that what might be interesting and what we're starting to explore is if there are medical professionals, for example, that might be able to give of their time to be able to make sure that the people who are taking beds in Lublin and Warsaw are people who have skills that are needed, right? I want to make sure that we're not engaged in disaster tourism. That's not what we want to do, right? We don't want to take beds or food or buses or resources from people who really, really need it. So we've begun to start to, a part of our sort of fact finding there was to understand what was needed to the questions that you've asked. And we're trying to kind of suss out what might be helpful in terms of human resources, if there are professionals or others that might be able to really lend their resources there. That would be who I would say should go. And that's kind of who we heard from across the board with the volunteers. We said, do you need more volunteers? And the answer universally was yes, if they have skills. Yes, if they have the ability. Yes, if they have experience in disaster relief. Yes, if they are skilled in trauma care, et cetera, et cetera. As far as supplies, we are doing a collection both for AFIA, and you can find out more on our website about supplies that are specifically, that was one thing that we tried to be clear with our congregation. We are being clear now too, is, there can be an inclination to just open your closet and do a spring cleaning and take everything you don't want anymore and bring it to some place that I'm sure somebody would need it. That may not be the kind of help that Helpin's all about, as Shel Silverstein said. So finding out whether it's through Shaaray Tefila or AFIA Foundation or Ukrainian churches that are doing collections, make sure, if I had one piece of advice, is that before you go and just bring stuff, that you find out, that you ask what's needed, and make sure that you bring what's needed. So we can, if people want to bring stuff to our synagogue, they can, but I would implore people to check out our website, find out the kinds of things that we're collecting specifically, so that it's the kind of help that helping is all about.
Absolutely. And what's been the reaction of your congregation?
Our congregation has been so moved by this crisis. They were moved before I went. And then when we told people I was going, people were, I think, proud that I was going, but also extremely generous. We gave people a list of supplies that I was told that I could bring. And then Friday afternoon, I loaded up 5 humongous duffel bags, which was 2 more bags than I thought the airlines would let me take. Fortunately, they let me take more. And that, I would say, was about 10% of what people had brought. So we rented a U-Haul van and brought a jam-packed U-Haul van to the Ukrainian church on 7th Avenue and 30th Street yesterday. And supplies keep coming in. So people have been incredibly generous financially to the effort and supply-wise. And I think people just want to be able to help. We as Jews know what it's like to be refugees. We know what it's like to be kicked out of our homes. And so and also many Jewish people, the other thing is to say is that many of our families were kicked out of Ukraine 130 years ago. My own great-great-grandparents were kicked out of Ukraine 130 years ago. So there's a kind of resonance for this crisis when you see Ukrainians fleeing that has moved the hearts, certainly of my congregants, but I also know all peoples of faith and peoples of no particular faith. The world has been moved by this situation. Again, the challenge is to keep our eyes peeled. And I would say, and this is a little bit of a, I don't know what we would say in Hebrew, a zetz, a little poke, is to notice which refugees we pay attention to and which refugees we don't. There was a story a month ago we only heard this when we were in Poland. A group of Syrian refugees tried to cross from Belarus into Poland, and Poland wouldn't let them in. And I didn't hear that story. The world didn't outcry for that. We didn't do a collection of supplies for those people. So I think it's also important for us to pay attention to which refugees. There's millions of refugees around the world, and we need to do, the work is immense. The challenge is to make sure that we're helping as many people who look as many different kind of ways as we can, and not only the people that might look like us. So that's a piece of challenge that we need to internalize too and pay attention to.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. This has just been such a wonderful, informative discussion. We appreciate so much your words of wisdom and sharing your recent mission trip to Poland and your stories and what your synagogue is doing here on the Upper East Side in Yorkville, and how people can get involved and go to your website and see what supplies are needed and that can be donated. We want to thank you again for being our special guest this evening and for your outstanding leadership and all that you're doing. I also want to thank our viewers for tuning in and watching Rise Up with Rebecca Seawright on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Thank you and good evening.
First you go down and then you go up to make it better, down on the